12-year-old girl, drenched in sweat under the scorching afternoon sun, pushes an old, rusty lawnmower across a stranger's yard. Her frail hands tremble, but she refuses to stop because every dollar she earns brings her closer to the chemo treatment that might save her life. Neighbors watch in silence, some with pity, others with admiration, but no one steps forward to help. Until a man walks by. Dressed in a simple shirt and jeans, his presence is unassuming. Yet there's something about him that makes people turn their heads. As he watches the young girl struggle, an idea sparks in his mind, one that will change her life forever. What happens next leaves everyone speechless. Stay till the end to witness a moment of pure humanity and unexpected generosity that will restore your faith in kindness. Before we get into today's story, let us know where you're watching from in the comments. Now, let's get started. The midday sun hung mercilessly overhead, baking the quiet suburban street in a sweltering heat. The air smelled of freshly cut grass and gasoline, the scent thick and sharp as the old lawnmower rattled and coughed beneath Emily's trembling hands. Sweat trickled down her forehead, stinging her eyes, but she blinked it away, forcing herself to keep pushing forward. Her small frame looked out of place. Behind the bulky machine, her arms thin, her movements slow but determined, every inch she mowed felt like a battle against her own body. The weakness in her limbs, the dull ache in her chest. It was always there, a cruel reminder of the illness trying to take everything from her. Just a little more, she told herself, tightening her grip on the handle. One more lawn, one more step toward the money I need. The sound of kids laughing echoed from down the street, carefree voices, full of life. Emily used to sound like that, before the diagnosis, before her world shrank into a cycle of doctor's visits, medication, and whispered conversations she wasn't supposed to hear. She could still hear her mother's voice from that night. "We can't afford another round, not without help." The words had haunted her, pushing her out here, mowing lawns for strangers, swallowing her pride because survival didn't leave room for dignity. A warm breeze rustled the trees, carrying the scent of barbecue from a nearby house. Her stomach clenched. It had been hours since she last ate, but food was an afterthought now. Right now, all that mattered was finishing this job and moving to the next. Then, out of the corner of her eye, she noticed someone approaching. A tall man, dressed in jeans and a simple button-down, his movements slow and deliberate. He stopped a few feet away, watching her with an unreadable expression. Emily's hands tightened on the mower. Strangers often looked at her like this, some with pity, others with curiosity, but none ever stepped forward to help. She braced herself for another passing glance, another moment of silence before he continued on his way. But he didn't. Instead, he took a step closer, tilting his head slightly, as if seeing something in her that no one else had. And just like that, the moment shifted. The heat, the exhaustion, the hunger, all of it faded into the background. Because for the first time in a long while, Emily felt something she thought she had lost. Hope. The old lawnmower sputtered as Emily forced it across the thick grass. Every step felt heavier, her body screaming for rest. But she couldn't stop. Not yet. Not when she still had so much money to raise. She wiped her forehead with the back of her hand, her breath coming in short, uneven gasps. "Come on, just finish this one," she muttered under her breath, urging herself forward. Then she heard it. A voice. Deep, steady and unfamiliar. "You do all this work by yourself?" Startled, Emily looked up. The man stood just a few feet away now, the shadow from his tall frame stretching across the lawn. His face was rugged, aged, but strong, with piercing eyes that seemed to study her carefully. She hesitated. Strangers rarely spoke to her beyond polite pleasantries. Most avoided eye contact when they saw her bald head beneath her baseball cap, as if her sickness made them uncomfortable. Yeah. She swallowed, suddenly self-conscious of how exhausted she must look. It's my job. The man raised an eyebrow. Some job for a kid. Emily's jaw tightened. She hated when people said that, like she was some helpless little girl. I'm 16, she corrected, gripping the mower's handle tighter. Still a kid. His tone was calm, but something about it felt different. Not mocking, not pitying, just observing. Emily exhaled sharply. Look, mister, I don't mean to be rude, but I gotta finish this lawn. The man didn't move. Instead, he folded his arms across his chest, watching her. Why? She blinked. What? Why are you out here mowing lawns in this heat? Shouldn't you be in school or hanging out with friends? Emily stiffened. The question hit harder than she expected. Friends, school, normal things. Things that felt like they belonged to another life, before the hospital visits, before the weight of medical bills crushed her family's spirit. Her throat tightened. She could lie, pretend she was just another teenager looking for extra cash. But something about the way this man was looking at her made her pause. So, she told the truth. I'm saving up for chemo. The words came out steadier than she felt. Insurance won't cover it all, so I'm helping my mom. Silence. The man's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. A depth. A knowing. Emily braced herself for the usual responses, pity, awkward apologies, or worse, empty words about how brave she was. But none of that came. Instead, the man nodded slowly. That's tough. She exhaled a small, humorless laugh. Yeah, it is. Another pause. Then finally, he spoke again. You know who I am? Emily frowned. What kind of question was that? She gave him another glance, studying his weathered face, the confident way he stood. There was something vaguely familiar about him, but she couldn't place it. No? Should I? That's when he smiled, a small, knowing smirk. And just as Emily was about to push her mower forward again, he said something that stopped her cold. The name's Clint Eastwood. Her heart skipped a beat. Wait, what? This wasn't just some passerby. This was Clint Eastwood. And suddenly, everything about this moment felt different. Emily's mind raced as she stared at the man in front of her. Clint Eastwood. The name carried weight. Her grandfather used to watch his movies religiously, calling him the last real tough guy in Hollywood. But standing here, in the sweltering heat, with sweat dripping down her back, she didn't have time to process it. She still had work to do. That's nice, she finally said, gripping the lawnmower's handle. But I really have to finish this. Clint raised an eyebrow. You always this stubborn? Emily scoffed. You have no idea. She turned away, yanking the pull cord on the mower. The engine roared to life, drowning out the quiet tension in the air. She pushed forward, focusing on the rhythm, the task at hand. One row at a time, one paycheck, closer to her next treatment. But Clint didn't leave. She could feel his gaze on her as she worked, and the weight of it unsettled her. Most people either avoided her or drowned her in pity. Why was he still here? After a few minutes, he spoke again, loud enough to be heard over the mower. You shouldn't have to do this. Emily clenched her jaw. Yeah, well, I don't have a choice. She finished another strip of grass and wiped her forehead, glancing at him. He hadn't moved, standing with his hands in his pockets, watching her with an unreadable expression. "Where's your family?" he asked. The question sent a sharp pang through her chest. She hesitated, considering how much to say. Not that it's any of his business, but for some reason, she answered. "It's just me and my mum. She works 2 jobs, but it's still not enough." Clint nodded slowly, as if he understood. "And your dad?" Emily exhaled, staring at the ground. "Gone." The word hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Not gone as in dead, but gone. The kind of absence that cut deeper because it was a choice. Her father left the moment things got hard. She expected Clint to offer some empty words of sympathy, but instead he was quiet. And for some reason, that made her chest tighten. The silence stretched between them, but Emily forced herself to focus. She had a job to finish. She shoved the mower forward again, the sun beating down mercilessly. Her arms ached. Her lungs burned. Then suddenly, snap! The mower jerked, the engine coughing before dying completely. Emily stumbled forward, barely catching herself. She yanked the pull cord again. Nothing. Panic surged through her. No, no, no. Not now. She dropped to her knees, flipping the mower on its side. The blade was tangled with something thick, probably a hidden rock or piece of debris. Her hands trembled as she tried to pull it free. She couldn't afford a broken mower. If she couldn't work, she couldn't earn. And if she couldn't earn, I can't afford to stop. Clint must have seen the frustration on her face because he took a step forward. "Let me help." Emily shook her head, her pride flaring up. "I've got it." "Doesn't look like it." She glared at him. "I don't need your help." Clint met her gaze, his expression calm but firm. "Everyone needs help sometimes." Emily's throat tightened. "Not me. I can't afford to." She yanked at the stuck debris harder, her hands slick with sweat. Her breath hitched, her frustration bubbling over. Then, without warning, Clint crouched down beside her. His presence was unexpected, intimidating even, but oddly steadying. He studied the tangled blade before reaching into his pocket and pulling out a pocket knife. With a few swift movements, he cleared the jam. Emily sat back, stunned. He didn't ask. He just did it. Clint stood up, wiping his hands. "Try it now." She hesitated, then pulled the cord. The mower roared back to life. Relief flooded her, but it was quickly followed by something else. An uncomfortable mix of gratitude and resentment. She hated feeling helpless. Clint must have sensed her turmoil because he spoke again, his voice quieter this time. "You know, kid, strength isn't just doing things alone. It's knowing when to let people in." Emily swallowed hard, his words hitting deeper than she wanted them to. She didn't respond. Instead, she pushed the mower forward again, forcing herself to focus. One row at a time. But as she worked, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had just shifted, and she had no idea what Clint Eastwood was still doing here. As Emily powered through the last stretch of the lawn, her mind was still reeling from Clint Eastwood's words. Strength isn't just doing things alone, it's knowing when to let people in. She didn't know why, but those words stuck to her ribs, like something heavy, something she didn't want to admit, was true. The engine sputtered as she finished the last strip of grass. She exhaled, wiping sweat from her forehead. Done. Another lawn mowed. Another step closer to paying for her next chemo session. She turned to Clint, expecting him to be gone. Just another person passing through her life. But he was still there, watching her with that same unreadable expression. Then he did something that made her stomach drop. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a check. Emily's throat tightened. No. She shook her head, already backing away. I don't take charity. Clint didn't flinch. He simply held it out. It's not charity, it's a job well done. Emily's hands curled into fists. She couldn't take it. She wouldn't. I don't need your help. The words came out sharper than she intended. Clint's face remained calm, but there was something else now, a quiet patience. You work hard, kid. No one's questioning that. But tell me this, when was the last time someone helped you, and you let them? Emily opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her mind flashed back to hospital visits where she sat alone, her mother too exhausted from double shifts to stay. To days when her body ached so much she could barely push the mower, but stopping wasn't an option. To the nights she spent staring at medical bills, trying to figure out how much more grass she'd have to cut to keep herself alive. No one helped because she never let them. Her chest felt tight. She looked at the check in Clint's hand, but still couldn't reach for it. If she took it, was she weak? Did it mean she had failed? As if sensing her thoughts, Clint spoke again. I get it. You don't want a handout. So don't think of it that way. Think of it as an investment in you. Her breath hitched. Clint exhaled, his voice low but firm. You're not just surviving, kid. You're fighting. And fighters deserve a shot. Something inside her cracked. The weight of it all, the exhaustion, the fear, the pride, clashed inside her chest like a storm. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel alone. Her fingers trembled as she reached forward, and she took the check. As Emily clutched the check, a strange mix of emotions swirled inside her, relief, gratitude, and a lingering sense of unease. She had spent so long proving she could stand on her own, that accepting help felt like betraying the one thing that kept her going, her independence. Clint must have sensed the turmoil because he didn't push. He just stood there, his weathered face calm, as if waiting for her to work through it. She swallowed hard. Why are you doing this? Clint gave a small shrug. Because I've seen tough kids before, and I know the ones who make it aren't the ones who do it alone. His words settled into her bones, heavier than she wanted them to be. She stared at the check again. The amount was more than enough to cover her next round of treatment. It was enough to buy her more time she desperately needed. And yet, she glanced back at her old rusting lawnmower, the same one that had carried her through months of struggle, through sweat and pain and exhaustion. It had been her lifeline, her proof that she could take on the world. But now, for the first time, she wondered, was survival the only thing she wanted? She felt Clint's eyes on her. He wasn't just giving her money. He was giving her permission to choose something different, to stop surviving and start living. Emily exhaled slowly. I don't want to feel like I owe you. Clint chuckled, shaking his head. You don't. But if it makes you feel better, pay it forward when you can. She looked at him, searching his face for any sign of pity. But there was none. Just quiet understanding. Her grip on the check tightened. Then finally, she nodded. For the first time in a long time, the weight on her chest felt a little lighter. The next morning, Emily stood in front of her old lawnmower, running her fingers over its worn handle. It had been her battle armor, her proof to the world that she could fight on her own. But now, she saw it differently, not as a symbol of her strength, but of her solitude. She had spent so much time proving she didn't need help that she had nearly turned away a chance to live. The check from Clint Eastwood sat on the kitchen table, untouched since the night before. She had barely slept, replaying his words in her mind. Pay it forward when you can. She realized now, accepting help wasn't weakness, it was a bridge to something greater. Taking a deep breath, she grabbed the check and stuffed it into her pocket. She had already made up her mind. Instead of heading to the hospital first, she made a stop at the local community center. She walked up to the donation box and slipped in a portion of the money, enough to help another kid struggling with medical bills. As she walked away, she felt something shift inside her. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't just surviving, she was moving forward, and that felt like winning. Emily's story isn't just about survival, it's about resilience, kindness, and the power of unexpected generosity. She fought her battle alone until one moment changed everything. But the real lesson? Strength isn't just in perseverance, it's in knowing when to accept help and when to give back. What would you have done in Emily's shoes? Have you ever experienced a moment where someone's kindness changed your life? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your stories. And if this video moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Stories like Emily's deserve to be heard, and by sharing them, we can inspire more acts of kindness in the world.